It's not what you expect from the In One Voice Jewish Community Festival, even though it is a Saturday night event focused on bringing Jewish music to a younger audience. There is a balagan of noise, movement and colour as a large group of musicians wearing gaudy clothing, some of them with false beards reminiscent of ZZ Top, moves through the crowd, making their way to the stage at the old ABC studio. Slowly the music takes shape and a tune emerges as the 24 musicians take their places. The singer, Husky Gawenda, dressed in blue mechanics overalls, starts slowly. Der Melech steht in die Gatges. The king stands in his underpants. And the familiar Purim song by Itzik Munger hushes the crowd into silence. And then he reaches the chorus, Samachaya, and the band and the crowd takes off. My name is Alan Price, and I have the pleasure to bring you another In the Bund podcast series. Today I'm joined by Simon Starr, the founder and driving force of Yid, a band that has taken the Melbourne Jewish music scene by storm. Thanks for joining me today, Simon, to talk about the phenomenon that is Yid.
A pleasure.
Simon, how and when did the idea of a band like this come to you?
Well, I mean, the truth is, it didn't really come to me. I was spending time with Willie Ziegler after we'd been living in Israel for 6.5 years, my family and I. We came back with no money. We returned as a family of three with as a family of five with $1,000 in the bank, which was a somewhat terrifying prospect and no assets at all. And anyway, I said to him, what am I going to do? And he said, oh, you could always start a Yiddish big band. And then that was a bit of a joke and we left it at that. But then I really wanted to reconnect with a lot of old friends of mine who I hadn't seen for many years, who were all musicians. And I thought, rather than have a party or have a dinner or something, I'd sort of call a rehearsal. So I had to make up a band for it. And then this idea had been on my mind. I'd mentioned it to friends. I'm thinking about doing this whenever I ran into them, and they were all interested. So we had a rehearsal and the rest just sort of flowed from there.
Simon, Yiddish is not a language you grew up with. It's not part of your cultural heritage in the way that it is for people like me. I grew up in a home speaking Yiddish before I spoke English. Why the focus on Yiddish music for you?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I mean, I didn't exactly not grow up with Yiddish. So my dad's mother spoke Yiddish with her friends, but she's Israeli. Well, she was Palestinian at the time. She was born in 1915. And so for her, the homeland and the motherland was Israel. And I grew up always feeling like Rosh Bina, which was the village that she came from, which her family helped build, that was my area of the world. That was where my sort of roots were. My grandfather, who was her husband, died when I was about 4 or 5, and he was one of the first Yiddish teachers in Melbourne. When he came over from Poland, I think early 30s, late 20s. And so it was definitely there. It was definitely there. I heard my grandmother speaking Yiddish. It was a funny language. She spoke with all her friends, her European friends, who were sort of, they were somewhat curios to my brother and I, because there were names like Gutcha and Yanka and Basia and all these sorts of names, which they were out of my frame of reference. Everyone I knew was sort of had Israeli names more. And so there was that. And then I also was always, I've always been fascinated with Jewish culture. And when we got back from Israel, and I still do miss Israel terribly, I felt that one way I could sort of hopefully sublimate that terrible longing was to just play a lot of Jewish music, particularly as in Israel. In Melbourne, when I left Melbourne, the Jewish music I was aware of was some klezmer bands that played fairly faithful faithfuls, but not museum music, but they had preserved this style and tradition. And then when I got to Israel, I see Jewish music is not just, it's not something for old people to nod their heads politely to. It's exploding there, and it's bursting with vitality. And it's the Jewish music of North Africa. It's the Jewish music of Yemen. It's the Jewish music of Bulgaria, of the Greek Jews, the Turkish Jews, Jews from everywhere. And it sort of blew my mind a little bit. And so in the 6.5 years I was there, I did a lot of different music, but I did a lot of Jewish music, and it really excited me, including some crazy klezmer guys who played this very avant-garde sort of Weimar Republic cabaret / circus act, but with virtuosic music. And I'd seen big bands there that incorporated all different elements. And Israel is really a country where the music scene is very hybridized. They mix up a lot of styles, and they do it sort of fearlessly. So when I got back, and Willie suggested, I knew it was going to be something that I didn't know anything about, and that was kind of attractive to me, because I'm always sort of trying to expand my knowledge and consciousness of the world. And I knew your son Gid and Husky. I knew that I had a great love for them, but I didn't know them particularly well. We'd done a few things over the years, a few gigs together, but that was about it. And I saw it as an opportunity to really just deepen these friendships and learn a whole lot along the way. And both of them were a little bit skeptical at first. You're gonna, they looked at me quite rightfully saying, "You're going to do something Yiddish. What do you know about Yiddish? It can't be disrespectful to Yiddish. It can't be, we don't want to be, this is not supposed to be some sort of, trifle." And that level of commitment I found inspiring, and that sort of devotion to not just high musical standards, but a high cultural standard, where it would be easy for me to breeze in and just say, yeah, we'll play this music. Yeah, we'll do it this way, and just sort of stomp all over it. So it became important to me to sort of learn about the cultural mores of the Yiddish world and Yiddish culture, and then make sure that we were not, that a 5-year-old and a 95-year-old would be able to enjoy this music the same. They would be able to dance and laugh and sing. And
yeah, it's interesting your comment about Gideon and Husky, because when Gid was first getting underway, Gideon was particularly excited about it, but he warned me. He said to me, "Dad, you might not like what we're doing with Yiddish music." So when I listened to that first gig that you played, that I attended at the ABC studios, the one I described in the introduction, it was a little bit, whoa, I'm not sure where this is going. But my reaction was like the rest of the audience's reaction eventually, Simon, and we'll pick up on that a little bit later. Simon, you chose an unusual format for Yid. You've got a narrator, Tommy Kalinsky, whose role it is to weave the music together. So it's performance art, it's not just music. Why did you go down that path?
It was really important to me that Tommy be involved. I've known her for many years, and this is not at all to say that she's old, because she is tremendously young of spirit. But I wanted there to be a range of ages in this band as well. And I wanted someone who I knew who was musical, not just a theatre person, but a theatre person who, literary in music. And I wanted some sense of that Weimar Republic, slightly off-putting and slightly uncomfortable, where someone talks and they're not just delivering it in a beautiful BBC news sort of voice. They're poking around a little bit, because the history of the Jews, obviously, and the history of Yiddish in particular, is not always comfortable. So I came back from Israel, I was never an apologetic Jew. I was always possibly a little bit too upfront about it. I mean, I can't remember. I shaved a Magen David into my mohawk when I was at the College of the Arts. I wanted everyone to know that I was Jewish, and if you want to talk about it, let's talk about it, sort of thing. So I didn't want to have it this sort of homely, nice, fun, family-friendly sort of thing. I want it to be something that makes people think, and for it to be a sort of a multi-sensory experience, that you can dance to it, you can sit and listen to it, you can appreciate the actual content of the text. The lighting is really important. That there's sort of it captures some of the breadth of what I consider to be the sort of astonishing avant-garde nature of a lot of Yiddish music and poetry. It actually amazes me how radical a lot of that poetry and music is, not just for its time, but now. It's still very vital and direct, which is one of the beauties of Yiddish for me.
Simon, your passion for Yiddish and for Yiddish is really very clear, and it's communicated both in the performances and in the conversation we're having now. Of the 24 people in the band, I think 10 of them are Jewish, and I can understand that for you and the other 9, this is as much a labour of love and a way of connecting to your Jewishness as it is anything else. But for the other 14 members of the band, that's not the case. How did you get them involved? What does this represent for them?
Well, I mean, most musicians, at any rate, the musicians who are at the level that I like to work with tend to be, students of life and very open to just simply expanding their consciousness in general. And most of the musicians at this level have totally foregone technique and are all about playing in a spiritual way. So they were the people I contacted mainly. I wanted people who would be open to the sort of the theatrical nature of this band, as well as whatever musical challenges would come their way. Now, if you took 90% of decent professional musicians in Melbourne or in Australia, and you just put the charts in front of them, they would be able to execute the chart effectively. But I wanted people who had big enough personalities that they would bring themselves and their view of the world. And so how do they take Yiddish music? Well, some of them have played a little bit of it, but this is not, this was quite unexpected, but a lot of them, and they still do, they thank me for asking them. Now, these are people who have released albums that were very influential in the Australian jazz scene, that have international reputations, that have run their own bands for years, have won every award that you can win in Australia and beyond, have toured internationally. And they just like being involved in an experience, I'm assuming, that is authentic. And it's not authentic by the fact that we pronounce the Yiddish perfectly and all that sort of thing, because I know there's many arguments in politics about that. But they like being involved in an authentic experience. It's interesting, it's colourful. One thing is guaranteed: there is always a lot of food, and we always drink a l'chaim, and it's a fairly high percentage alcohol volume l'chaim. And as one member of the band has said, and he's probably the most respected saxophonist in Australia, he said, like, I've never been in a band that eats and drinks this well, and it's much fun. And for me, it combines, and I know this is a little bit esoteric, but it combines to me the joy and sort of expressiveness of Hasidic life with the, not didactic exactly, but the sort of intellectual side of the Mitnagdim, of the Vilna Litvak sort of side, where the emphasis was on learning, book learning, and that attaining spirituality through logic, as opposed to the attaining of spirituality through that expressiveness. And so I'm trying to combine that without trying to be too pompous. And so it tickles a lot of different parts of people's, musical awareness and their sort of general personality. So they've taken to it. We've given a lot of them Yiddish sort of, how in Aboriginal culture there's skin names.
Mm-hmm.
So we've given quite a few of them have gotten skin names because they've ended up, like one of them, Tony Hicks, who's now known as Tunny or Eitan. He plays like 80% of the gigs he does, well, when there were gigs before Corona, were Jewish music, and not just hacking away at weddings. He's playing concerts of arranged, composed Jewish music. So they've taken to it.
Simon, that leads us on to an issue that I want to also explore with you, and that is the choice of music. The songs you perform range incredibly widely, from Samachaya to the classic American Jewish music, Bei mir bist du schein, the beautiful Yiddish translation by Anne Gawenda of Paul Simon's The Boxer, through to AC/DC Back in Black. So how do you choose the music, Simon, and how do you respect the origins of it, be it AC/DC or Itzik Munger, whilst you're modernising it and improvising it at the same time?
So, I mean, it's not exactly as dry as we have a shopping list and we just tick the shopping list, but it's something like that. It's managing the portfolio of songs, if you know what I mean. So, for instance, if I feel we're getting too far away from the tradition, we're going to do another song from the tradition. And if I feel like, so with The Boxer, I really wanted a song that non-Yiddish speakers would know, and that there would be some part of it that they would be able to, everyone would be able to sing along with. And that The Boxer had this perfect match because it's sort of like a nigun. You know, the chorus is like a nigun, and the words, the story is so much like an immigrant coming to New York, you know, the Goldina Medina. And so that seemed a perfect fit. And then, for instance, so we were going to be recording a second album starting a few weeks ago, but now we'll do it when this period's finished. But we had to pick some new songs to do in it. And so, you know, I asked around, I asked Husky and Gid and Tommy and Willie, what, you know, for ideas about music. And we prepared a list and we listened to them. And then one song we were doing is Ofen Pripachik, which is just mind-blowingly beautiful and so haunting. And we did our own version of that, which unfortunately we haven't got to play in Melbourne yet. And then the AC/DC song, well, Willie thought about how great it would be to do a AC/DC song because we're Australian, and then to really give it a Yiddish twist. So, for instance, he wrote a new nigun, sort of a freilich. He wrote a freilich at the start of it, and then Husky wrote a poem, which was a meditation on our take on Back in Black. Because what we read into that song is, it was about going back to spirituality. And for Jews, in some, a crude reading is putting black on, you know, putting on a black hat, putting on payos. And so he's going back in black. And so Husky wrote a meditation on the idea of finding spirituality in a very fractured world. And then he finishes with his own nigun, which we did. So the AC/DC part of it, we played pretty faithfully, and with the Zigga Girls sort of screaming out the lyrics with youthful abandon. But then it's bookended by these two different, very klezmer and very Yiddish bits of music, but they are both original pieces of work. So we've sort of had our own flavour in it. And then with the traditional tunes, I mean, Samachaya, you know, the songs from the Megillah that Munger wrote, they're just incredible. And any opportunity to play songs as good as that is taken. And then we it goes through the ringer. We think, what can we do? What's a model for a song that we can do with this that will allow people to access the feeling of the song and what the song's about, and then also will allow us to give them something to dance to. So we're doing Lo Mir Ale. We started doing we were going to record, and that sounds like a Sly and the Family Stone rave up from the late 60s. And but it's got, and Husky wrote words. We sent a WhatsApp around he wrote new words to it about what it's like to live in Melbourne, and let's drink to that. So it's got a verse about watching Essendon versus Collingwood on Anzac Day. It's got a verse about let's go and I'll go and kiss my sweetheart on Ackland Street and go for a walk on the beach. Let's drink to that. And the very first verse, which I really love, is Husky wrote, it's we recognise the traditional owners of the land upon which we're singing. And that, you know, I find that tremendously moving, particularly to sing it in Yiddish in Australia with this funk groove. So people are dancing, and then hopefully they'll start to ask questions. What was that song about? You know, why is everyone singing along with the law? So we try, and there is some didactic element in there, but I'm hoping to make it as fun as possible, so that people don't think, oh, they're preaching to us again. Oh, you know, learn this language, find out about it. And rather it's just, I'm dancing. Oh, I remember the words. Oh, what does that mean? That sort of thing.
Simon, you'd performed at the Ashkenaz Festival in Toronto, after which you and at least Gideon and Husky made their way to New York. I'm just wondering if you can tell us how you ended up at the Brooklyn graveside of Rabbi Schneerson in the early morning, in the early hours of the morning, drinking schnapps with some of his followers.
So I was staying with Gideon Husky in a Airbnb in Brooklyn, and I got into Manhattan, I think, early in the day. Gid got in a few hours later, and then Husk came in. He was going to come in at 11 at night or 12 at midnight from Canada, and I hadn't been away from home, not about to perform, by myself, like not in living memory, and so I just thought, oh, let's have some fun. You know, I still had terrible jet lag, so I was wide awake. So when Husky got in, we called a taxi. The taxi came about 1 a.m. And I said, let's just go and see what that's like. Let's go to the gravesite. And we went there, and one of the strangest things I've ever seen at night, because it was in summer, you know, the end of summer, and it was a full moon, and the Rebbe's tomb is in amongst all these other graves. It's in a cemetery, and sitting very calmly at the entrance, but inside the cemetery, not the bit where you walk in, were two like sort of silver-coloured foxes, actual live foxes. I've never seen two foxes together. No, normally they're quite solitary animals. Anyway, it was just a very interesting sight. We went inside, we had a schnapps, we wrote a prayer down, and we went to the tomb. It was very, it was just a fun thing to do. It's the sort of thing I would have done when I was 16, 17, travelling with mates. And it felt like, you know, we could have also gone up the Empire State Building or something very touristy like that, but given where we'd come from, the Ashkenaz Festival, it felt just very appropriate to go and make it a sort of a cultural tour. And I can tell you, at 3 a.m. at the Rebbe's tomb, it is not empty. It's open 24 hours a day. There were taxis arriving as we were leaving, and there was probably about people there. It was a bit of a trip, actually.
Simon, I want to share with you 3 reactions to Yid that I have heard. The Saturday night that you'd performed in One Voice, in that concert that I spoke about right at the beginning, I was walking back to the car and bumped into an older friend of mine. He's well into his 70s. He's not one known for his excitement, but he was bubbling over. I could not believe it. And he's saying to me, we've got to find opportunities for them to play more. We need to identify venues where we can get lots of people. They're amazing. The second one, again, was from an older friend of mine who's in the Milkumanong choir with me. And she travelled to Adelaide to see you perform at Womadelaide. And she said to me after that, I never thought I would see this day. Thousands of people dancing and singing to Yiddish music. She was completely overwhelmed. At the recent performance of Yid at the Habonim Hall, my wife overheard 2 young women speaking. They were probably in their late teens, maybe 20. And one asked of the other, have you ever been to a Yid concert? No, was the answer. To which she replied, you are going to have the best night of your life. Now, you spoke earlier on, Simon, about wanting to appeal to people from 5 to 95. Well, I reckon you've gone pretty close to that. Have you been surprised by the reaction of the audiences to Yid?
Yeah, continuously surprised. I continue to be surprised. I can tell you this, and I'm not proud of it, but our very first gigs, maybe the first 3 of them, we'd be playing away, and we didn't have much of a repertoire. The idea was sort of crystallizing still. It wasn't really a fixed thing. And at each of the first 3 gigs, I sort of went over to Willie Ziegler, and I said to him, is this the worst thing you've ever heard? I think this is the worst thing I've ever heard. And he goes, I don't know. I can't tell. And anyway, and then people are going bananas and dancing in the audience. And then at the end, people say, that was amazing. I thought, well, I don't know what's going on, but people like it, you know. And then gradually, you know, we'd watch videos of it and think, this needs a little bit more salt and pepper, it needs a little bit more oil, maybe a bit too much sugar. And we sort of worked on the recipe. And so I kind of understand the response these days. I can more relate to why people like it. I think at first the enthusiasm was just seeing so many people playing Yiddish music in such an exuberant way. I don't think it was that, I personally didn't think it was that finished a product in the first few gigs we did. But then gradually, as when we played at WOME Adelaide in 2018, we really got our act together. We recorded a CD, we did rehearsals, we had a show. And having said all that, we were pretty surprised to play in front of 5,000 people, and there must be maximum 500 Jews there. That's a very favorable reading. But 4,500 non-Jews are dancing around and doing the horror, and there's massive circles of people dancing horrors. It's 45 degrees. It's not cold, it's not pleasant, but everyone's just going bananas. And that was the moment when I thought, I think I can now see how we're supposed to do this. Like, this is going to work. And then I'll tell you what was also surprising. I spoke earlier about Yiddish politics. When we went to Ashkenaz in Canada, we come from little Melbourne and we don't know anything about the rest of the world, and I'm happy about that. And we come to Canada, and there's a lot of very dyed-in-the-wool American Yiddishists there who, with all their ideas about what you should play, what you shouldn't play, how you should play it, all this sort of stuff. And we just got up and did our set and did it very exuberantly. It was a particularly wonderful performance and a great memory. At the end of it, 5,000 people, standing ovation. And there were a lot of people crying in the audience. And I didn't know why, and we went to sign some CDs, and there's people coming up and hugging us and crying and thanking us. And they were saying, what you guys do is you're playing music that no one ever plays in America or Canada anymore, because they think it's too embarrassing and it's too old hat. And it's considered too schmaltzy. But not only do we not ever hear these songs, you're playing these songs and they sound so different and alive now. And so that was probably the response that I've been the most proud of, is that to touch people who seemingly live in this environment, such high cultured, refined Jewish culture and politics, but actually I think they've spent a fair bit of time just running around in circles and have gotten out of touch with, the actual tradition, the spirit of the tradition, as opposed to the thought of progress for progress's sake.
Simon, in a recent interview that you did at YIVO, you talked about your ideal concert coming out of the coronavirus, and you talked about playing in one of the outdoor venues in New York. Why pick that one?
Well, I grew up with a lot of, probably like a lot of Jews in Melbourne, with a lot of American Jewish humour, most of which came out of New York. I mean, the very first films I saw were the Marx Brothers, and then Woody Allen and Mel Brooks, and these were things that Sid Caesar, and anyway, the list goes on. I grew up with this stuff, and I identify it with New York. And then as I grew older and I read more books and learnt about it, New York seemed such an interesting epicenter of Jewish culture, very different to Israel. And if you did a Yid gig in Israel, I think that might be my ultimate, to do it in front of the old city. But I'd love to play at an outdoor concert in one of the parks in Manhattan, because I just know that New Yorkers, particularly New York Jews, with their thirst and desire for sort of cutting edge stuff, combined with the warmth and the fidelity to authenticity we have, I think they would just really get it. I know Israelis would just completely go off to the energy. They would love the energy. They wouldn't understand anything, but they'd love the energy, and they just love the party aspect of it and the multi-sensory thing. But New York Jews, with their Yiddish learning and the fact that, all the authors who lived there, Sholem Aleichem and all that sort of thing, that they would, it's a very New York band, it feels.
Simon, I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels this way, and that is, we can't wait for your next album to come out and also to see Yid perform live. I think it will be absolutely amazing, and I can't think of a better way. And it might take some time, unfortunately, but to break out of this coronavirus isolation period. Simon, thanks so much for being with us today and sharing some of your thoughts and insights about Yid and hopes for the future. I do look forward to catching up with you in the not too distant future and wish you all the best. Thanks very much.
Same to you, Alan. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the 5th podcast in our series being brought to you by the Bund in Melbourne, with the hope of making the isolation period a little bit more tolerable. If you haven't already done so, get a copy of the Yid CD and you will very quickly see what all the excitement is about. I hope you enjoyed the time we spent together with Simon Starr, who shared with us the origins, hopes and aspirations for Yid, and also how he ended up at the graveside of Rebbe Schneerson in the early hours of the morning drinking schnapps with the Rebbe's followers. Bis wir treffen sich weiter, bleibt gesund und stark.